There's a recording. Okay, welcome. This is September 10th, 2021, AKV3. Regular routine, I think, in terms of some introductions here in a second. I've got a couple announcements also to cover when we get down there. Last week, we were going to talk about the challenge event and follow up from that, and we went off into the wild yonder of finances and other issues related to Alaska and opportunities. Happy to let this one organically go in some other direction again, although I have a couple things that I'd like to touch on, potentially the challenge pitch, as well as the Innovation Coalition issues, and we'll see how it goes from there. So let's back up then for a second and check in with what's going on and anything interesting folks have seen the last week about creating Alaska's next economy. Ryan, you want to kick it off?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I have to confess that I had a big long email drafted up and thinking about our last meeting, and it got lost in the work of the week. And so I'm really glad to get to share some thoughts here. I left that reverse pitch thing feeling really inspired, and seeing the people who engaged in that being also really inspired with some questions and wanting to make connections. And for that reason alone, I thought it was a great win. After last Friday's conversation, I still consider it to be a great win, but I left that conversation about financing, and I kind of, during the conversation, I said, well, why don't we just go start a fund? And then I realized, well, that's been done before. There have been multiple funds that have started in Alaska, and there's been a lot of really important work that has been done up here. And it's not that that work didn't work, but I just view that work as a necessary precursor for additional work to be built on top of, and to be built around. You kind of have to have a big win for people to say, oh, this is possible, this can happen. And I think that HealthTie and the Ocean Cluster and Launch Alaska and SAF are really examples of those big wins and the work that has been put in our ecosystem up here. And so now it's just kind of like backfilling some of the other stuff there. So I left feeling really hopeful and with a bit of a perception shift. Like at first it was kind of like, well, what we did didn't work. And it's like, no, it's working exactly how it's supposed to work. And there's just a little bit more to do. And so that feels like a really good place to be. So I'm excited.
I'm just curious, without belaboring this, because I want to get to everyone, but can you just succinctly say, from all of that thought, did you reach a conclusion about what's next? What work is next?
No, okay. No, not yet.
That's fair enough for now. I didn't want to leave that thought hanging if it was there.
Yeah, early stage support, but what exactly that looks like, I'm not certain.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Let's see, Andy, how are things today? What's new?
Not a whole lot. I didn't have quite as an exciting week as I did last week, so
that's a good thing. That's a good thing. We need to take it down a notch or two from the beginning of the semester.
Yeah, but the thing that stuck out with me this week was the conversation with Oscar. I am going to butcher his name, but anyway, on the Facebook page, talking about doing these video conversations, and I think that just kind of stands out to me as a good next soft step, I guess, to kind of to have conversations that are videoed that people can find, short, like 5 or 10 minute, at most 10-minute conversations that people can watch and get excited about, and want to become more involved and find out how to be more involved. We keep them short but engaging. I think that is a good way to sort of get that conversation out there outside of our core group. And I'm gonna just stop at that for today.
Are you familiar with StoryCorps?
No.
I'm wondering if this is something like this. StoryCorps is absolutely incredible. It's a weekly program. It shows up on NPR every Friday morning, and they are conversations between two people, usually significant, deep, very rich conversations that are recorded. And it's a program that's been going on for a few years now to archive these stories and make them a national resource of stories between people. The format of them is audio, but that rich capture of a story, in that case two people, sounded to me like kind of something related to Oscar. And I was curious if other people who have been in that Oscar thread saw that connection to StoryCorps that I did.
I didn't make that connection, but I think that that is a very powerful connection. What a cool example of a model that has been realized at a national level, and a really great framing that this is a resource. You know, I've often wondered, these conversations that I have with people, I wish that I could record them and I could share them with other people. And so,
yeah, and StoryCorps is, is actually, creating an archive of these things so that they're accessible down the road. So, okay, well, that's interesting to see that being picked up. I agree that the thing with Oscar has been a good thread to follow. Dick, what's new with you today?
Well, just off a phone call with a native corporation I'm working with, and I keep coming back. I think some communication with you, Kai, and I know with Ryan, and I know Kitty's worked in this area. I'm just thinking about the role that, they got the major village or regional corporations and a lot of the smaller or not so small, even village corporations. And this whole idea of startups and entrepreneurship and a lot of the topics we're talking about here, if there's a way to make more linkage into that area somehow, that's what's on my mind. Aside from, just my own work that's going on. Plus, Andy knows this, teaching in the K-8 teacher certification program now at APU, as well as in the Business and Public Policy Institute. So seems like I'm getting pulled more into that, and going back to my old education days, I have to dust off all of my old books and cobwebs and find out that what I knew isn't so much relevant to, albeit there are a couple things. So, and you know that very well, Kai. I mean, you have someone in your household that practices that 5 days a week.
Yeah, I used to manage the vocational education, or then it became the career and technical education master's degree program at UAA back a long time ago. One of the things that always amazed me was they at some point came up, one of my roles running the program was reviewing the textbooks. And for this semester, they presented this group of books that all came from the 60s. And I thought, come on, this is the 2000s. Why are we using textbooks for education from the 60s? Can't we find something newer, more contemporary? But to your point and your experience, I went and actually looked at them, and in an area of career and technical education, vocational education, the work that was done in the 60s was rock solid. We just simply forgot about it for 40 years, and we needed to be reminded of it again. So at any rate, that's good to see you involved in that program. I think it's really valuable it's going, and that you're mixed up with it.
Yeah, I think about that in terms of the consulting work, and Kitty knows this, and I'm sure the rest of you do too. What was old is new and just gets repackaged and renamed.
That's it.
With a few tweaks and sure, some new thoughts and stuff, but yeah. So
new name, couple fresh examples, and a publishing deal. Okay,
yeah.
Crazy. So are you familiar, and do you work at all with Cindy Middlestat from Bristol Bay?
Well, why is this doing this? I apologize.
All right, well,
I got my phone off. I forgot to turn it off on my computer. So
That's okay.
too many bells and whistles. Yeah, I know Cindy. Yeah.
Okay, so she's a good one down the road if you're wanting to talk more about rural startups and entrepreneurship, to bring her into that. She runs the Bristol Bay Development Fund, and that's her world. All right, Kitty, what's going on?
Morning. Well, yeah, not only, what's old is new again, but in some of the kind of social sector things, I remember, and I apologize if I told you all this before, but I went to one probably about 5 years ago, and literally everything we had talked about 15 and 20 years ago. Why can't we make these things happen? I'm like, we really went a long ways down that road. Anyway, it's interesting, it's relevant, and it's sometimes a little heartbreaking that some really solid ideas don't get executed well. Oh, I know who I was talking to. I was talking to Angelina Estrada Burney about this, Senator Murkowski's staff, because we were talking about how with every administrative change at the state level, you get a whole sweep of the executive branch and the ideas, and they have to kill every idea that was the predecessors. And, that could be a real nodal leverage point, is to create a way for us to kind of, and I told her all about AKV3, and she loved the idea of it's the indigenous and the resource development, and what's working in those that we want to carry into the next version of our economy. But why can't we do that even just at a election cycle? So, hey, so I missed the conversation on financing last week. I've been in the tail end of summering. I've still got a little bit left to do, but I'm glad to be here today. The thing I bumped into since I last talked to you all was the website for Alaska Venture Fund. How many of you guys are familiar with them? Anyone? Little? So I knew of Erin Davashan because when she was with the Moore Foundation, they funded the Salmon Fellows program that I designed and ran at the forum. But and I knew that she was turning it into the Alaska Venture Fund, and people like Matt. Yeah. Anyway, so I knew of people who were involved, but I only recently came across their website, and I'm going to put it in the chat because I got super excited reading about it. And there's pieces in there about story. It's about really, it's time for, like, I'm looking at a page right now, it's time for Alaska to lead. It's taking resilience and regenerative and biodiversity and cultural heritage. And it's really talking about Alaska V3. It doesn't say entrepreneur everywhere, but it does have, to me, all of the same values and principles of what we're doing here in Alaska V3. So I look forward to creating a connection there. Warren Jones, who I got him to attend the reverse pitch, and we chatted afterwards about it. He's been talked to. Anyway, I just think this is an interesting example of an aligned kind of entity. They both raise funds and invest funds. And I think it might be interesting to spend time with Erin and Janella White, who used to be at Forker Group. She's working there. And then Stephanie Quinn Davidson just started there too. So Matt, what's Matt's last name? Not Radeski, Matt somebody. Anyway, so several folks that I think would be the kind of people who would enjoy this. And what they're doing is they're creating this momentum in their own way. And I think we're very aligned. Enough on that. So I'm kind of excited about that. And yeah.
Look forward to maybe figuring out how to make that connection more,
Yeah.
Figure out what the next step is with it. Cool. Laura, what's going on today?
Well, glad to be here. I really sensed that I missed something last week as soon as you sent out your email that said, wow, we went off track, and so I was actually going to go back and listen to that recording, but it didn't happen. I would love, maybe sometime probably the best thing is for me to listen to that recording if I'm really interested, but I am definitely interested in the funding conversations. We had a pretty good weekend finally, so maybe it's turning fall. I guess that's what's going on. So we had, yeah. Wow, that was the most disorganized report.
That's okay. The key thing I got
Glad
out
to
of
be
that,
here.
I'm glad to get the key thing out of that, which is you had a good Bandera weekend. That's
Did have a good
good news.
weekend. I think one other thing, I just looked up StoryCorps. StoryCorps is a really incredible model. There's so many facets to pluck from it because it is evolved over the years. And it's gone through several phases. It started in 2003, by the way. It's much older than a few years ago. And I think it started from the 9/11 stuff. I think that's actually what actually triggered the whole project. And there's a whole bunch of, the one thing about StoryCorps that's a good thing to focus on or to investigate is how they scaled. They started small and now it's a project that's much larger than what you actually hear on the radio. And it's educational, it's got a whole bunch of facets to it. That also made me think of another underutilized resource in Anchorage. I don't know how this fits into the conversation, but StoryCorps reminded me of it. How many of you guys have heard of ATME, Alaska Teen Media Institute?
Heard of it, but have no
Yeah,
interaction.
they do some cool stuff.
So the reason I know about me is because when my daughter was in 7th grade, I had no place to take her after school. And as a single mom who was incredibly desperate to find a place to dump her, I discovered that the ATME offices were 1 block from where her school ended and she could walk there. So when I went to go, and my daughter had always been interested in film and all that kind of stuff. And so when I took my daughter to go visit there to see if it would work out, they were kind of like, well, we don't really take 12-year-olds. And I was like, oh, you have to take this one. And so that birthed a long relationship with ATME. Which is another really incredible and rarely known entity in Alaska. So they take kids young and they give them a bunch of content skills, everything from journalism to here's how you do your homework. And they may even work with them a lot afterwards. Chloe's 23 and she still works for ATME. And they produce content. And at this point, they're kind of our go-to for inexpensive short films, short videos and ads and content, stuff like that. And the reason is because they use it as teaching examples and the production quality is incredibly high. We paid $20,000 for our first video. And that was from an Alaska agency that refused to give us our raw footage, by the way. And then, in the end, we eventually worked our way over to ATME. And, most of the films we do are under $500. When I say films, I mean ad type stuff. But anyway, so I just think it's something that somehow factors into V3 because they are providing, instructional content and grooming kids to do these things that are very technologically relevant in our future. And I think I should stop talking.
I think that's a phenomenal resource. The two things are obviously there's a huge connection with Seeds of Change, I suspect, with that same, focus of youth. But what you're touching on is an incredibly critical issue, which is the youth at risk demographic doesn't stop at high school. It's basically a 15 to 25 year gap because we do very little to support teens that are, now out of high school and they hit this donut and all the resources that aren't quite there for adults. They're not quite ready for adult resources, but they're aging out of the youth resources. And for ATME to recognize the value and continuing that relationship past the normal high school cutoff is a huge asset to our community that's there. So at any rate, good stuff. Ryan, I've got your issue on the arts things coming out. I'm bringing it back up on the agenda in a couple minutes. So let's continue around the horn for the moment. Margot. What's new today?
Lots of exciting things. I I keep digging into the policy conversation we had last time,
Oh,
and I met with the we call ourselves the Alliance or other funny names. It's essentially Catherine and Gretchen and myself, we co-lead Upstart Alpha, the accelerator, and similar to a lot of what teachers do, we wanted to start getting together with all the other people doing similar work, and you trade notes and you do lots of one of my sister has a name for it. She's a kindergarten teacher, but you swap a lot of information. You kind of keep each other up to date. So we had a meeting yesterday, and two things. We were trying to say, what do we want to do during startup week that isn't really, nobody else seems to be really stepping forward to kind of offer it, that we've heard a call for. It's the policy thing. So this is very, very early, but we were thinking, what would that look like? What would be valuable? And what we've come up with so far is not actually to have, legislative people or staffers there, but instead to start gathering, I don't know if it's working groups, small groups, if there's a group of people who are super into like ocean industry policy issues, can we start get some of them running in the same direction? And energy people or healthcare people or whatever. But we thought what we might want to host first is getting people even talking. What are the talking points? And if you wanted to bring forward an issue that you see, it's a policy issue, it's affecting entrepreneurs or small businesses in a particular industry, what do you even need to bring, to your legislator? Is it policy memos? Do you need to be working with other organizations? Like, what does that look like? So we're in the very early stages, but we've heard so many people over the last week in very different conversations talk about, I need policy help, or there's a policy issue. So I thought, that's still in progress, but we would love, I don't know if it's a whiteboarding event, but if we could get some of these people who are all talking about the same thing, policy issues related to startups, running in the same general direction or having some good general starting questions, that I think would be really exciting to me. When I have a policy background, and when I've worked with some legislator staffers, one of the things they said, I got 10 million things going on. If you have discussed and thought through an issue, you have a lot of the main players, you guys are all saying the same thing, and you could, say to me, here's, a 4-page document. We've pulled together a lot of great resources, some great examples, pick our brains. They're like, that is a phenomenal starting place often for them, because then they have a great place to start. They can start to craft things, bring in you or your stakeholders when necessary. So, that I've been real excited, not really sure what that's going to look like, but we think Startup Week might be a great time. But if Startup Week gets overwhelmed, we would love to be in that general time frame just because it keeps coming up. So that's one thing that we talked quite a bit about. The other thing was, and I wanted to check out the Alaska Venture Fund. I'm not familiar with them at all, but Linda, who runs the G-Beta program, was talking about she's getting increased excitement from investment groups around the state of Alaska. So for G-Beta, it's a 7-week program. They take in 5 or 6 teams with the end goal of preparing them for either going through a formal accelerator program that usually takes equity, or helping them do an initial fundraising round of $50,000. So they're doing a lot of one-to-one work to help them be ready to kind of make the next large step. So they do what they call investors. I think it's Investor Swarm. Might have a nicer name than that, but essentially bringing together a lot of investors so they can start asking lots of great questions. And she's had a number of investment communities or even some native corporations reaching out to her lately saying, we do investment. We don't really do it in the state right now for X, Y, and Z reasons, but could we at least be invited to hear what you guys do? And she was like, yes, all about that. So the venture fund, I'd have to read up a little bit more on what they do, but they might be really interesting to connect with Linda if they were looking to invest potentially in Alaska companies. So that's something that just piqued my interest. I'm not familiar with the venture fund. I need to read up a little bit more, but I know that Linda will be looking to do that, I believe, in the very late fall, November, December timeframe. But it's exciting to see more people reaching out who've kind of quietly been doing their investment thing. And then to see kind of a formal thing like, well, I'd like to be invited to that. That's really exciting for me to see. So I'm not involved with that, but I'm happy to connect people to Linda, who's running that. So those are two of the main things going on right now.
Margot, what was the name of that group you were just talking about?
So it's G Beta. It's a program out of the University of Wisconsin.
Okay, yeah, that's Jane's group, or, yeah. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yes. As a side note, I know some of the people who founded that because I have a lot of family and friends in Wisconsin. So I knew about this years ago. So when it came to Anchorage, I was like, yeah, it's a really cool model that I would love to help continue to support.
Nice, thanks. Yeah, just back on Alaska Venture Fund for a second. I've done a little bit of work with them back in the days when we had the Accelerator Fund going the last few years. My experience with them is that they're really focusing on social impact investments. So I didn't find them to be structured for typical startup business going off and making a buck scalable kind of stuff. But if you were doing new social community programs, they were trying to provide the seed money to help get those things off the ground and things that would have social impact. Things may have changed. It's been a couple of years since I've interacted with them, so I'm excited.
I think they're doing a broader approach right now, and I don't know how they've changed, but they seem to be very focused on early stage, almost pre-stage.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it could be
I don't-
good for us to catch up and learn more about
I don't
it.
think that they're opposed to social entrepreneurship, but really they're trying to change the narrative and the system of values that we bring to our economy and our society. And so they're, I think, a partner with less focus on the making a buck. But again, I think that they're open to how do we make these things profitable and sustainable in the future.
Yeah, fantastic. Good deal. Let's see, a couple updates for me. So one of the things that came out of the discussion last week was the question about the Alaska Investment Program, which is a permanent fund of money that was allocated over to the McKinley Capital. That had been in the news and folks were curious about that. I had a walking meeting with John Wanamaker this week, who's one of the principals of the fund program at McKinley Capital, and had asked him just kind of, his view of what was going on with that program, its effort to increase investment in Alaska versus being Alaska money being invested out of Alaska. A couple of things came out of that discussion. One was the idea that, while that fund is largely investing outside of Alaska, it's because there's not that much going on in Alaska, and the permanent fund has fiduciary expectations on how much return the fund gets, and this money was provided to Barings and McKinley Capital with the idea that it had to meet the same kind of investment returns that the rest of the permanent fund gets with its broad-based national investment thesis, which means you got to go out and find the best deals. And what he's focusing in on, though, is this idea that by this Alaska investment program, making these kind of investments wherever they are that are, world-class good investments, they are bringing Alaskans and other Alaskan companies to the table in discussions about projects and activities. And he views it as still being a catalyst for other Alaska economic development activities. We also talked about, is there a gap in the funds in Alaska? And he related the thought that on one hand there is, on one hand there is. On one hand, he feels that there is a demand and an interest in standing up another accelerator type of seed fund for that early stage investment. But he came back around to the fact that we need to do more to create more investable opportunities for that fund to be attractive. That essentially the investors are really tired. There's been a 7 or 8 year push that got a lot of this stuff started with the 49th State Angel Fund. A lot of people have put a lot of money into a lot of deals and not gotten much out of it at all. And that's kind of burned out a lot of folks at this point. So there's opportunity there, but he, like me, also generally believes that there's actually a lot of money in this state. We're not short of capital. We're short of good deals. We're short of a few good examples of some wins on that to get more of that money engaged. But that kind of left the question of what do we do next still kind of hanging in there. I did talk with him about a couple different fund ideas, and the one particular one that he was really supportive of and wanting to see us potentially dive in and do some more work on was one I've proposed about having a student managed investment fund to develop more skills and experience on the part of the students managing early stage investments. And you may have seen in the news that there are a couple student managed investment funds at APU, UAA, recently funded, and UAF. It's been around for a while. But these funds are all essentially mature stock portfolio, PE, pension program type of management funds. That is, you're basically just running the numbers on the stock market, and you're just looking for the analytical formula for what to hold, what to buy, what to sell. There's nothing early stage going on, nothing local or anything like that. It's just pretty low risk management. And what I've argued for a number of years with the APU fund and UAF is to carve off 20% of the profits of that existing fund to use as a student managed investment fund in startups and give them the experience of that, with the idea that it will both create more experience on the part of Alaska students to manage the investments. And we need more good Alaskan investment managers for early stage work, but it also will prepare those same students to be more knowledgeable if they're on the entrepreneurship founder side, to understand the whole lay of the land on how you go off and get investment. So that was a good discussion. It left us with, potentially some work to do on the UA side of things. Still a big, huge question mark about the broader funding area. Second, couple other just quick things. One is, one of the things that just struck me kind of, out of the blue this past week was with this challenge activity we've done, we've clearly identified that we have a health innovation hub, we have an energy innovation hub, we have a rural business innovation hub, we have an ocean innovation hub. And it struck me with the question of, why isn't there an ed tech innovation hub? We spend such a phenomenal amount of money in Alaska, and if one of the real goals and that 4-quadrant framework that we use in this work is the development of the brain power, then it seems like we're missing something major by not having an ed tech innovation hub process going on. So I just kind of woke up to the fact that, oh my goodness, there's a lot of good stuff going on. I'm not saying there isn't a lot of ed techy kind of things going on. I know UAA's got their program to support it. UAF's got it. It's out there. But on the other hand, and there's a link I put in the notes today to an example of what's going on the big picture of ed tech. And I just kind of woke up to that issue. Laura, it looked like you wanted to say something on that.
I don't know what ed tech is. I was just going to type it in the chat, but I got technologically problems there.
It's education technology. So it's all.
Yeah, but what does that mean though?
Oh, it's a variety of things. It can be online learning platforms. It can be different ways of doing delivery. It can be tools and support programs. It can be new teacher support. But it's basically rethinking the technology around the learning process, both for the traditional K-12, but also a lot of it has been focused in on adult learning. So the Udacity, Coursera kinds of things, those are all ed tech also, but there's a lot of it going on, trying to figure out how to increase the performance of kids in the K-12 system. That, all of our metrics testing based things have forced a lot of investment into trying to redo how textbooks are written, how they're delivered, all of the ancillary support materials that you can have. For example, with schools that may have a core math program, they'll also have bolt-on programs that kids can access from home or after school to try and supplement the core curriculum that they have. And that's just getting, an amazing amount of money poured into it. And I'm just reflecting last night that we were meeting with Senator Holland, no frigging relation, don't ever mess that up, and Kaufman at a community council meeting. And, as happens with the conservative, folks, they got on this immediate rail about how much we spend on education and about, how they feel like it's a waste of money that we spend so much in our state at this point. And it just occurs to me that it is an issue, and innovation to me is a path we need to invest in to try and turn the tide on how that money is being used and our satisfaction that it's being used well and that we're getting the results that we want to get out of it.
The people that always use that argument are the people who already had a leg up in the first place. So it just drives me nuts.
Yeah, okay. I'm with you there. Two other quick things. One is I did follow up with some of our elder youth discussions. I was meeting with Cheryl, I think Williams from Alaska Humanities Forum that's helping George out now with the Leadership Anchorage program. And I didn't realize there's now a Leadership Alaska program. I'm sure, Kitty, you've probably worked with that, but we got into this discussion about our discussions about the fact that youth and elders, maybe we're kind of losing track of elders knowing how to be elders and youth knowing how to be youth and how to, create that program. So I kind of got her attention on that issue. And she's encouraged me to circle back around with Cameron and continue that discussion, feeling like maybe there's something we ought to be working on there and bringing that lens to that. Final thing, I'll just dump on you also with the policy issue.
Kai, before you move off of that,
Yep.
They do have a program called Conversations Across Generations. And I think that last winter they did some on race and social justice, but essentially it's that intention of bringing people together across generations, and those are open kind of enrollment things. Leadership Alaska just started this week. Yesterday was the very first time, and I had shot a note off to Ryan and a couple other people because it's a test. It's focused on regenerative leadership, an 8-month series. It's for alumni right now, but I think they're headed in the right direction with it.
Yeah, sure. That's good to see. And once again, there's a lot of good things going on in Alaska, as Ryan was kind of mentioning to begin with. The last thing is this policy issue. And I'm kind of in a conundrum about where to go with it at this point. I've been kind of holding off, as Margot and I have talked about, with kind of watching to see what the alliance thing was going to become, because I had been pitching the coalition idea out of the Calgary group, and the alliance thing was kind of jiggling this past spring and summer. And it seemed like the alliance thing was really diving into an alliance of the accelerator programs. And not getting into policy kind of issues. The last time I circled around with folks late in July and beginning of August about that. Isaac, when he was pitching last week about the need for some policy work in this area, brought back the fact that that he sees this as a need, and he's willing at this point to support and even fund somebody working on it. And so I was circling back around on the idea of potentially using AKV3 and pursuing that issue of standing up something to go ahead and move the coalition idea forward and that engagement in the policy area. And knowing that Isaac has indicated he's willing to put some money into trying to help that process, that might help with some discussions and gatherings to support that activity, and potentially other folks would. So Margot, I guess I'm trying to noodle through, where we go with this, knowing that it sounds like the alliance is kind of moving back into the policy issue. And I've been kind of careful about not getting in the way of the alliance group if they were going that way. But on the other hand, was not going to sit around and not do nothing for too long if there was an opportunity to move ahead. So that's kind of where I'm at now.
I would say we're not moving. We're thinking about what are startup week activities that we wanted to collaborate on. And that was one that all of us independently had been like, people have been talking about policy nonstop lately. So I think we would love to just actually, if other people wanted to host it, we wanted to attend, because I think a lot of us had either experiences with that right to start. I guess Gretchen actually has looked into the right to start, and she said it's really cool. There's like a framework that comes with it. The thing that she said was not difficult, but that she's like, it's a cool framework, but it's very generic, like covering all startup issues for your entire state. And she's like, that's cool. Most people are like, I really want to talk about, I'm in clean energy, or I'm in health, or I'm in education. So she was like, how would we take that and, I don't know, put people in breakout groups or do something? We don't necessarily want to host it. This keeps coming up. So we're like, how can we help support conversations around this, not to have us lead, because we can actually, you know how that is, being at the university, you just have to be very careful about like,
Mhm.
what are you seen as officially like advocating for thing, you know? So we want something to happen. We've heard a lot of call for it from a number of entities. So we're not saying we want to lead it. We just want something to happen. So we would love to help collaborate on that, is I think where we're at with that.
I think it's exciting. And obviously I'm looking at this as I'm sure you are, and Kitty probably is now, is I just see a strategic doing working shop with a bunch of subgroups coming up, focusing on each of those domains. And I can just see the room set up with the tables for all those domains and folks working on this with some framing questions around, policy issues about, what's holding us back from creating the Alaska we want to build, in these different domains that are affected by policy issues that are in our way.
Yeah, it makes me wonder if V3 could act as the host. We've talked about having like a platform to collect this information and just share it. A repository of sorts, or somebody to help facilitate those conversations, and a strategic doing framework to get the conversations going sounds excellent. And then having a entity or a place to then land them and say, here's where you can connect in. Do you want to take it and run? Here's the talking points to talk to your senator. Here's how you can do this.
Yeah, I think it's that. So with the time we have and watching what else is going on, I want to keep this innovation coalition policy, whatever thing, kind of on the front burner. I would, if you haven't seen it, invite you also to see, there's a link that I put in the notes this week under announcements for the innovation short. It's the presentation I gave at the Innovation Summit this past spring. If you weren't there or haven't seen it for a while, I'm not saying it's particularly good or great or anything, but as we talk about this innovation coalition idea, it is there. It's a 10-minute innovation short, and it would allow you to at least know what the heck I'm talking about if you're not sure about Calgary and what their program is and what an innovation coalition might be and where it's coming from, so that as we move ahead with this and we make reference to this thing, you understand at least the starting point in my mind. I say that though cautiously, because I'm really careful when it comes to benchmarking kinds of things. So not just go and copy somebody else's program, but to learn from other programs and to try and, take the good pieces of it that help inform how we look at our local situation. So I don't want to suggest I'm trying to copy Calgary, but I think there's something there to learn from. And I think that and some of the work going on in other communities are ones that we could mash up into a uniquely appropriate Alaska focus on how we build capacity in our ecosystem. And the presentation touches a little bit on what we used to have. If you go back about 8 years ago, we had a thing called the Entrepreneurship Edge, which was our statewide innovation coalition activity that had a year-round focus. That kind of died off. So at any rate, the presentation talks a little bit about what that was, what it did, how it worked, as well as talks about the Calgary example. So you've kind of got a couple data points on that.
Can I ask a question, Kai?
Yes, please.
So, I just wanted to say that I was also really inspired by a lot of the reverse pitch stuff. Were you trying to get anything out of this group in relationship to commenting on that event today? Or have we already covered it?
We have not covered that. That's coming up in a couple of the things that I had left today. So let's go there. I'm sorry, just putting a link into the notes here. Let me get that.
I don't want to hijack your agenda. I just was curious. I don't actually even have anything necessarily to contribute. I was mostly wondering what other people thought.
Yeah, no, let's do that. I was going to go next to Art and Ryan, but let's stay on this innovation reverse pitch event. So I've gotten back about 9 survey responses from that. I'll pull that together and share that along with some of the resources that were shared. I may get that done this afternoon and get that done. I am curious about kind of, what feedback there is on the event. I thought it went well. I do have the Slack channel set up. A few people have signed up, but I'm not seeing any critical mass there. There were some folks in the surveys that indicated interest in wanting to follow up. I do know that one of the projects that was pitched, the Ocean Cluster Crab Project, is right now being studied by the Mechanical Engineering Senior Project class in Fairbanks. It looks like they might pick up that challenge. And I know there's interest on the part of Juliet excuse me, I misspoke, Jacqueline Summer with Health Ties. She really wants to figure out how to, build some support for the challenges that she pitched. She's serious. These challenges need somebody to work on, and she's trying to figure out how to do that. So we've had some discussions about, how do we incentivize people to work on some of these things, whether that's money, prize money, which is the typical way these challenges are managed. There's, a prize money that's put out there to incentivize people to work on these challenges, and the winner gets the prize. But in some cases, the incentive is to promise some sort of partnership in terms of what happens if you get a winning submission that somebody says, we're going to actually buy it, or we're going to, run a pilot project for you. There's a current project that's out on the challenge website that I updated for some sort of biotech challenge. And I'm forgetting who posted. I'll put the link in a moment to get you there. But at any rate, their contest had a modest cash prize, $5,000, something like that. But the real prize was they were committing Google something or other. One of the Google organizations was committing to work with the winner of that to actually build the pilot project and to launch the business on there. So point being, back with Juliet and her health type, what we've talked about is we need to figure out how to take these challenges and put a little more meat to them in terms of the incentive of why should somebody work on it? What are they going to get out of it that would cause them to actually be incentivized to work on it? But I'm
okay. So does that mean, I was under the impression that part of the goal was to, the reverse pitch was supposed to get the wheels turning and given so that you could draw people into the startup week and startup weekend. And are there, prizes? That's where
That seems like a great
it would be good
motivator.
to have them.
Yeah. So
There.
maybe that's part of like the follow after stuff is, okay, so we've talked about these challenges, and then Jacqueline could come back and say, and here's some of the resources that are available if somebody wants to work on this challenge. And then people could then pitch that at Startup Week. Is that kind of the thinking that you've got there, Lori?
Well, I was just thinking, when you talk about prizes, would that be, first off, I think these contests are critical. I think having, 4 to 10 contests a year in Alaska that early stage entrepreneurs can use to develop their ideas are critical. I think there's not enough of them right now. And, that prize money is also essential. Even if it's $1,000, that'll buy you the next round of something. And, when somebody takes the time to get their idea together and pitch, it's kind of a good indicator that they have the motivation and to keep on giving them the incentive to keep going. I think those prizes are just, so the startup weekend is a one-time-a-year thing. And it just happens to be the next one. And so I guess what I'm saying is, what are the other, I guess I don't know what I'm saying. I just think the startup stuff, the contests are good.
Yeah,
I
Katie.
have a question about prizes. Roger Tennis, he has started a company called Founder Advisors. And I've been thinking for a long time, Laura, about, I wanted to intersect you and he, but would technical assistance be a prize worth offering? So it might not be cash, but it would be Roger and the Founder Advisors being, he calls it sort of the startup Sherpa. And he's, so I don't know, is that of any value?
Massive expertise is massively valuable.
All right.
The other thing is you can throw out with those contests, you put together a package of things. And, we didn't use half of the stuff that we got that were like the freebie stuff. We didn't use most of it.
Right.
It was
But
there though, as an offer.
It's there. If you can use it, great. And if you can't use it, nobody loses.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I'll reach out to him, maybe see what he spent time in Alaska, he knows a lot of us. And so he might be willing to give us a low cost sort of way
Where
of
is he
offering that.
now?
He's in Boulder. He's always been in Boulder, but he was with GCI for a little while.
So who does he advise? I mean, like,
He
what's his
advises
target?
startups. He is sort of so I need to know more about it, but he did so much startup work of his own. He did a bunch of innovation and entrepreneurial stuff. And after trying inside a few organizations, he decided to create really this group of people that are a resource, technical assistance to startups, and they can subscribe to the program. I'm thinking it's in the Techstars, but it's at a more personal scale. I don't know enough about this space.
What I'm hearing is that Laura is raising an opportunity to have more frequent challenges, and that this could be an opportunity for Alaska version 3 or an innovation coalition, or just maybe it's housed in different places, but to have set challenges that get brought forward and resources that are paired with those challenges, and just kind of like the carrot to keep the things moving forward. And I think that there's definitely an opportunity there. I think the balance is trying to make sure that you don't burn people out and that you pace it appropriately. But I certainly think that framing things for people is really helpful.
I'd suggest one of the things that I view this as is putting more pull into the economic development system. We've been kind of waiting for people to come up with ideas, and we do all we can to support them, but we don't necessarily have much pull that's bringing people in a particular direction. That is investable challenges that matter. Solve this one and somebody wants to buy it already, darn it, type of thing. And so to me, this is about creating challenge-based innovation that's solving problems that really matter to our state, and things where we're already spending money anyway. We might as well spend it on our own innovations and then maybe export it when we're done. But two thoughts in terms of this. One was, this first event was meant to be a pilot. Would anyone show up? Would anyone get interested? And it was with the hope that it would then become a regular activity at the beginning of every semester. Or maybe there's some better timing on it, but you could imagine very beginning of fall semester, very beginning of spring semester, to get students are looking for projects involved and seeding some of the innovation activities going on, and maybe one towards the beginning of the summer for folks that might be looking for summer projects on there. But it was also with the recognition at some point, with some confidence, we needed to be able to start having more incentives to get people on board to help out with that. My hope is that this first event was successful enough that we could leverage this into maybe going out and asking for some sponsors or some money, or even next time to get folks like Health Tie, Launch Alaska, Ocean Cluster that want to come and pitch their ideas, might have more confidence to come and say, and we're going to give, X amount of money to the person who gives us the best idea on this problem. That's the typical challenge contest type of format. So that's where I'm hoping this will go, and I want to see something done during startup week. This is the discussion Margot and I have had about, is there something we can do between now and startup week that will help the willing make some progress in some of these events. The Slack channel was a way to try and provide maybe a way to network some folks together. Potentially there could be some sort of sprinty type of activity if there's enough critical mass of folks that want to work on some of these challenges.
I just wanted to mention really quickly, I agree with Laura. I thought it was outstanding. One small thing that I would have done differently, I wish had been done. We did this for Upstart Alpha because we had a lot of people who were presenting from the accelerator that had internet issues, because most of them were not, well, some were in Anchorage, but a lot weren't. And so we're like, that's the worst when you're getting real excited for a pitch and then it's buffering. You can't see what's happening. People cut out. So I essentially said, I ran everything. I had every single presentation. I ran every single thing. And I did that ahead of time. And it went 100 times smoother than anything we'd done before. So that's a small thing, but then it takes it off of everybody's plate of like, now you share, now I share. People very quickly notice, like, next slide, that kind of thing. And for all the back and forth, and some of the emails were like, the chat was exploding, which is actually a great sign to me of great people were really digging in. But I understand that feeling of like, I can't keep up on the chat and I'm trying to move to the next slide and that. So for the next one, I would designate like one person runs the entire show essentially. And bye, Laura. And you know what I mean? But that is a very nitpicky thing. But I know the stress of being the person who's trying to watch the chat and keep the thing going. And now somebody's, screen isn't working. That's what I would do in the future. I've done that and I found it to be really successful and nobody complained. Then once you just said, okay, have it to me by this date at this time, make it a Google slide so you can change it up into the last minute. It worked really well.
Yeah, I got some similar feedback in a similar vein. The speakers, the format of the presentation was slightly different between each of the folks. And so if we were maybe slightly more rigid with how we asked people to present their information and the flow of it, maybe it was like, okay, we need one slide on this, one slide on this, one slide on this type thing. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but the feedback was that having it in a more consistent format and flow would then make it easier for the viewers to understand how to engage and where the actual challenge was in it. I think it's a trade-off that you don't want to, confine your presenters too much, but it could be a helpful thing, something to consider. But generally, they were very engaged, really excited, and interested in learning more about lots of the other things that were going on that were brought up through the event.
So wrapping up here, what's your thought right now? Should we maybe even try and do another challenge event during startup week as a way to maybe get in front of spring semester, or do something that more follows up on the challenges that were discussed at this point? Any general thought on that?
I think that we should do a follow-up for the current challenge, and then we should have an art challenge. And I can talk about that a little bit later, but I had a really inspiring conversation. So,
okay, good. Well, that's
my 2 cents.
Okay.
I kind of like that, Ryan, because I feel like we did make some loose offers through the survey to people, and I haven't read any of those responses yet. We talked about possibly bringing people in strategic doing-ish, and we also discussed following the writing contest that we would use, what if you combined the challenges and the writing contest to invite an art expo? And kind of triangulate this just to bring it into a little bit more richness. Anyway, so those are things I feel like we've started, and maybe there's a way of looping it back together in an and.
I'm like having a hard time containing all of this excitement right now, y'all.
Yeah, so let's cycle back over to the art issue, Ryan, and dump your thought out there, but also mindful of the time and trying to wrap up, and we'll have to maybe pick more of this up next week. But you're busting at the seams on the art issue.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with an art mentor friend of mine who works at the Anchorage Museum. And this art mentor, I said, hey, here's this project I'm working on with Alaska version 3. I know you've helped structure some other art competitions and are big into the art world. What could this look like? Here's who we are. Here's what we're trying to do. And she said, well, here's a couple places that you could host this thing at. But I think that this could be an excellent project for the Seed Lab. And what if, instead of asking for entries to be then hosted at the Seed Lab, you had a request for application or an open entry for getting challengers to then come spend time at the Seed Lab and then craft their ideas there and then present their ideas. And so combining that with today's AVM, the Alaska Venture thing, what if they were willing to fund the artists who were then going to be working and crafting their ideas? Because I think that if we're trying to build up a creative economy, it's important that we recognize the work that the creators are doing and we fund that work. But we need somebody to help make that happen. And it just made my head explode that somebody else thought this was so cool. And I didn't think that doing something like this at the Seed Lab could be possible. But this person offered to take it and set it on the desk of Julie Decker and to say, I'm willing to be involved through the application process. I'm willing to help pull in some of the other folks to help structure this and to put together this paper or your request for Julie. So why don't you draft something up, talk about it with the group, and then come back? And this conversation that we're having about having an art challenge seems like an excellent fit for what we talked about. So it's just very serendipitous to me. But I'm so excited because that sounds like such a great time.
And I'm just curious, Ryan, just for clarification, because there's two thoughts bouncing around. I can't quite connect them, and maybe I should and maybe I shouldn't. What I was hearing a few minutes ago was the idea of bringing the arts into the domain of the challenges. And is it your thought that the art challenge is, focused in new and different areas, or is there an intersection between these challenge domain areas that we've talked about and bringing artists to work in the challenges around those domains? Is there a connection there or not a connection?
I think that there's a connection there. So the suggestion was that we maybe offer a prompt, a word, a thing for people to then center their proposal or project proposal around. And so we could have our prompt of, something loose, like what is next? What do you think is next for Alaska? And then we could have the different verticals of food, of blue, of ed tech, of whatever it is that we want. And somebody could then have in each one of those focus areas something that connects to the larger prompt. So then you have the theme, but then you also have the special connections in there. I don't see these people necessarily as pitching a solution to a problem, but I do see them as like facilitating conversation and creative thinking around that.
Yeah, no, I can see them helping illuminate people's discussion, their perspective of these challenge areas without necessarily getting into solutions, but doing more to inspire people to understand the challenges and find opportunity and hopefully inspiration actually work in those areas. And I continue, as we've said before, think that, we need to build arts into the very fabric of everything we do. I think that's one of the unique contributions we can make in terms of a different way of approaching what's been done before. What do you see as the next step on this, Ryan?
Well, if y'all are on board, I think I'd like to try putting a pass together and a proposal. And I would appreciate your feedback on how to structure that thing. I would then like to pull in the person who I had the chance to talk to is Hollis Mickey. And so I'd like to pull in Hollis to get her feedback on how to structure this thing, how to draft it up and what this could look like. And so then we could kind of get our ideas, get it to Hollis, refine it some more, potentially get she's less interested in like the general AKV3 working, like conversations and more on specific working sessions. And so if we wanted to have then a breakout session to hone that thing in, I think would be game. But I'm happy to try and shepherd this thing
Do
through.
you have any thoughts on how much money would be needed if we were out trying to look for money, going to the venture fund or others to try and help fund this? Do you have any rough order of magnitude?
Not necessarily, no. I think that anything is helpful. I think that, if you could say maybe like $1,000 for material or something for each of the areas, like that would be supreme. But I don't know. I think Hollis would probably be a better person to get some feedback on that.
How many artists do you think would be in this in terms of the space and what's available?
Yeah, I haven't been in the space.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't been in it to see it, but she kind of offered that the upstairs could be a really great place to then just let the artists have studio space and to work their ideas. And so I don't know how many people you could fit in there.
I've been there. And it is, we're going to use it for the Salmon Fellows gathering. There's a big common space downstairs, and then upstairs is about 4 to 5 decent sized workspaces, small breakout rooms. And so you have me thinking, is this like an artist in residence over a course of a week or 10 days? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that certainly could be, and I think that the cool opportunity that was proposed was that we could have conversations. Our proposal could include the buildup to the launch of this competition. And so we could facilitate conversations at the Seed Lab in the downstairs to say, like, what are the challenge areas we think that are important? What does this framing question look like? And then could then open that contest up. And so the whole buildup to it becomes promotion and community engagement. And then hopefully we have some artists who are already aware and already interested in applying, and then people who are already engaged and invested and want to support it or want to at least tell their artist friends about it to help push it out.
Yeah, one thing I just suggest including in your thinking there, which is you're I think maybe saying the same thing, but I just want to be more explicit about it. I think that conversation should include how are arts engaged in this whole Next Alaska dialogue, not just the challenges per se narrowly, but I think it'd be useful to have a discussion about the economic and community future of our state, and creating that Next Alaska, and what's the role and how do we create an ongoing engagement process for arts, whether it's writing contests, visual media contests, the video curation, but kind of working on the ethos of how do we do this long term, and then dial it into this specific program, tied a little bit more around with the challenges, but not lose the conversation at maybe a broader level. The other thought, and I had I sent a similar note out to Ben Kelly recently about, we're pretty close to the time where I think we're going to need to start thinking about spinning off into separate focus groups, like some of the entrepreneurial support discussions and funding for startups. I think the art theme is one that's potentially going to need to spin off. The whole challenge kind of programming and the policy stuff might spin off. Right now we're kind of juggling all of them in these Friday discussions, and there's a core group of folks who are sticking with it, but I know there's a lot of folks around the periphery that have specific interests in specific areas, and this format doesn't necessarily always work for them in terms of that we're hitting so broadly and organically on many other things. So this kind of circles back to the issue of having the retreat kitty.
Yeah, I was gonna come back to calendars.
Yeah, is working on that, and to me that's one of the big issues to focus in on. Is we've had 9 or 10 months of these discussions. I think we've now got an immense set of resources in terms of the notes and what we've talked about and all the issues and opportunities and connections that are out there, but now thinking about what's kind of the next phase for this work, and that may be a change in the form of how the work is done.
Yeah, this seems very similar to a conversation where we've been having at Seeds, where we had one standing meeting and then we tried to work through all the things all at once. And we've now broken it into, we have a central gathering meeting, but then we have task forces that are then working, pulling issues out, working on the issues, and bringing stuff back up to connect and to build resources and get consensus. And
Yeah.
that sounds very similar.
I really think of, this is strategic doing lingo, but this ability for us to have a core group that is kind of guiding the development of networks is really a key model, I think, for us to be thinking in terms of that next evolution, and how we are guiding other networks that have more focused engagement in different areas.
What's the window of timing that makes the most sense for this sort of strategy?
Yeah,
retreat?
my window is kind of opened up. The startup weekend that I was going to be helping run in early October has been postponed until I don't know when. So I'm pretty much open all October. As we get to the weekend of the 5th and 6th of November, the startup weekend and the startup week, things are going to get pretty busy. So I pretty much can't do anything. I really shouldn't do anything the weekend of the 30th of October, because at that point I'm going to be in full startup weekend mode. So in terms of October, I would be free any of those weekends, 2, 9, 16, 23 along there.
Okay, so startup week, what are the dates? I know I should know this, but what are the dates for startup week?
Startup week is November
5th, you said?
Trying to get the right calendar. Oh, here we go. I got my calendar wrong place. So startup week is the week of November 8th. And we're doing the startup weekend the weekend before that. So Friday the 5th, 6th, and 7th, that weekend is the startup weekend. If it goes virtual, it'll actually be an event that's going on to some degree the whole week ahead of time. So that's why I kind of have to carve out the weekend of October 30th and afterwards. But the week formally is the 8th.
Okay, so that helps me. And I know kind of getting some sense of direction out of this retreat before that makes sense. So if I'm looking at October, my biggest lack of availability is the 6th through the 12th, or let's say the 5th through the 13th. So I could do the first week, and I'm assuming a weekend for folks, something like a Friday night.
Yeah, that would make sense to me, I think. I'm going to be flying back to Michigan on October 30th, and then driving the Alcan up that following week, and probably won't be back until the 9th or 10th. So that
Yeah.
chews up both of those weekends for me.
Yeah, but that's the end of October, right? Or are we talking about the end of
but-
September?
No, I'm talking the end of September. Yeah.
Okay, so the weekends of the 16th or the 23rd look like the most viable.
Yeah, and I see Andy said she's out of state on the 15th.
So maybe we aim for 23rd.
I'm thinking that right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I think we could get together, kind of socially, have, nice little barbecue or something on the 22nd, and then focus during the day on the 23rd. I've got room for a lot of people to stay. There's an Airbnb next door to my place if we have overflow. So we could maybe start to dial that in.
Sounds sweet.
So October 22 to 23. All right. And it would be, I'm sure, our Friday crew. Do you think others would be up for this? I mean, and it'd be nice to get Margie down from Fairbanks. She's so incredible.
Yeah, Margie's here in Anchorage.
Oh,
Yeah, I think she's an Anchorage person. I know her partner's here in Anchorage too. But yeah, there's Margie, and it'd be nice to circle around, with Mita and Carly Dennis. And there's kind of a core group of folks that have shown up on and off. That
right.
basically, it's the folks that are on the invite list for this meeting. There's a few
Mhm.
extras on the invite that have, rarely ever shown up.
Yeah.
So I want maybe kind of call it down, because I think it'll be important to have folks that have enough longitudinal knowledge of what we've been doing and awareness so that we can do that. But I also want to bring in some fresh perspectives and not necessarily limit it to just the regulars.
Yeah.
What's the number of people you think would be comfortable for the space and
Oh,
be able to do there?
and this is October. So yeah, the biggest space is outside because I just got a new deck. And inside, if we're all in one room, we could probably put like 10 to 12 in the main living area. I mean, that's sitting on bar stools, but that's doable in the main area. And then there's a lot of breakout spaces. So although that's not a huge number of people for breaking out, but and if the weather gets nice and sunny in the afternoon, we can sit out there by the fire. So there's a couple fire pits. There's a downstairs one where there's going to be wood fire, and then on the deck there's a propane fire.
Do you know, does the Airbnb space next door have any like big rooms?
I've never
No,
actually looked at it, so let me research the Airbnb. I've never been inside it, and it's actually got 2 units. They have been booked 100% all summer long, so looks like I froze again. But that's shoulder season, right? So it might be better.
That sounds like we'll anchor in and start doing that. I'll start putting that out in the notes and getting people to start saving the date.
Yeah. And designing for the retreat itself. I think Tracy and I could come up with some, complementary ideas because we're quite different. And we play well together.
Mhm.
I think I've got some other kind of designer facilitator friends who would be great, because I want to be able to engage and not have to always be the one. Yeah.
No, I think
Anyway, I'll be thinking about that and maybe touch base with some of my colleagues.
I think good to find a facilitator so that both you and Tracy could be helpful in doing the original design, but then completely free to play.
Yeah.
Actually,
Okay.
it'd be a guide. It'd be a guide, right? We got to do our strategic lingo. Strategic
Guide, is that what it
lingo.
is?
Guides, not lingo. It's not facilitators.
A guide. Yeah, I know who I'd like. She's in Seattle. It's the gal who's running the regenerative leadership programs. And I just saw her in Seattle last weekend, and I just wish she'd moved to Alaska.
Let's
Huh?
figure out how to buy her a plane ticket up and give her.
Yeah, that wouldn't be hard. Well, yeah, and You know, what's interesting is, well, she was the one who was going to design she was my co-designer for the Salmon Fellows event that got canceled by COVID that was going to be at the Seed Lab.
Gotcha.
So she really is connected to this stuff. She's just been able to do it all virtually. And I feel like some things need to be in person.
Okay.
All right, well, things to think about for sure. Funny how calendars fill up.
No kidding.
You want to send out a calendar invite sooner rather than later? I mean, I don't know if it makes sense to just like block out the weekend at this point, but I just live in fear.
Because there can be, I mean, we can hike on Sunday, you know, so there's the Winter Creek Trail or there's North Face. I mean, so it could be a fun weekend. I'm not doing North Face, but
Go ahead and get a calendar invite out as a save the date for that weekend and get people to.
okay. All right. So Girdwood Retreat, and
Sweet.
that's cool. And we'll work on the details. So I'll start texting
very
my.
good. All right. Well, we've kind of scared off most everyone at this point. Anything else for the good of the order today? Super. All right. Well, thank you for each hanging in there for this. And I got